Yeah, Grenada, it's just north of Trinidad. And so after serving 10 months in Guyana, I was sent to Grenada. And in Grenada, when I got there, there was 4 companionships. And there's 2 companionships that were in St. George's, that's the capital of Grenada, and that is where the branch is. And then there was a companionship in Guave, and there was a companionship that just barely opened up, kind of the province of Grenville, just a little town up there. And so there was actually, this is interesting, sisters. They're sisters in the mission, and they'll serve mostly on the islands, but the sisters wouldn't serve in Guyana. So going to Grenada, it was my first interactions with actually having like sisters in my mission. And after being on my mission for a year, it was kind of weird, like getting used to having like these sister missionaries around, serving in the same branch. But probably the coolest thing about like the location of the church in Grenada is that they bought this building it's a beachfront property, and they converted it into the church. And so if you go to the back of the church, you have this view of the beach and the ocean. You can kind of see the island jutting out. And it's the most amazing view on the entire island. And it's just like you're sitting in church, pondering the truths of eternity. And there you're looking into the ocean and the sun, the sunrise and the sunset. And it's a very beautiful country. So going from Guyana, where there was trash in the streets and there was garbage everywhere, to going to Grenada, where it was kind of like this paradise. It was kind of an interesting change and experience for me, but even though my heart is still in Guyana, I love that place. But yeah, with Grenada, I served in St. George's for the 4 months that I was there, and we actually lived in this area called Tempe. And since then the missionaries have moved, but it was on the very top of this hill. And to get home at night, there was this hillside that it had to have been at least like this steep, and there was 200 steps up the side of this hill, and we called it the steps to Mordor, and we'd hike them every single night. And by the time you got home, it was just like, it was the easiest thing to lay down in bed and fall asleep. Like, I had no problem falling asleep. And that goes for the whole time I was on Grenada, just because we walked everywhere, and there's still public transportation, just like there was in Guyana, where you pay the bus driver just a few dollars, and they'll take you really anywhere. But yeah, I walked a lot in Grenada. So when you go to Grenada, that's what you should expect, to walk up and down hills like all day. I didn't mention some of the food that you're going to find in these places. The race that's most prevalent in Grenada is African, and so they'll do a lot of oil, like one of their like main dishes is oil down, and so like in this dish they'll throw in like potatoes, and they'll throw in pig snout and pigtail, and this vegetable called breadfruit, and they just throw it in this big pot. And then you throw dumplings inside with it. And so we ate that a lot, and it's kind of some mixed reviews. Some people like it, some people don't. I was the type of missionary who I loved eating anything. And so we ate a lot of fish in Grenada, because that's how a lot of people get their living, is through fishing. And actually Guave is a fishing town, and some people might not know, but Karani James, he's the Olympic champion in the 400. And he is 400 meters, and he's from Guave, like this tiny little fishing town. So it's amazing that even like you can find the most amazing people just like in these small little obscure places. And that's what I learned about a lot of these islands, is that there's some of like God's most precious children, just sitting out on these little islands. And I love reading through the scriptures and the portions where it talked about like the isles of the sea. It just felt really cool to be a part of that area of the world, that I was on these islands. We're just like, God's children. We're just in these little remote places. But yeah, I mean, some other facts about Grenada. My time in Grenada, the nutmeg is it's the highest, I guess the thing that they produce the most of, and they export it. out of their country. So whereas in Guyana they export sugar cane, in Grenada they export nutmeg, which is so odd. Like, I didn't even, like, this random island in the Caribbean, and it produces nutmeg. And so you can actually go to like these forests where like the nutmeg is found, and they have this huge factory, and you can go through the nutmeg factory and learn all about it. So that was really interesting. And so they'll get a lot of their income from selling nutmeg, and it's actually a huge tourist place. So you're going to get all of these cruise ships that come into Grenada, and so a lot of the locals, they'll actually go to the beaches, and they'll have created like bracelets and necklaces or t-shirts, and they'll sell all of these things to the tourists that are coming in. So that was interesting, seeing tourists. That was the first time I'd ever kind of had any interaction with them on my mission.
So Grenada is the most wonderful place on earth. They call it the Isle of Spice, where everything's nice, because most of its exports are in spices, like nutmeg. Nutmeg is a symbol on their flag, and you can just find it everywhere on the ground, right? And so that's kind of their claim to fame, is the spices there. They've also got really, really beautiful beaches, you know. It's a pretty small island. There are about 110,000 people who live there. And to get from the southernmost point to drive on a windy road to the northernmost point, it's about 25 miles. So it's pretty small. And most of the population lives on the southern part of the island. St. George's is the capital. And then you have a couple cities up north, but the majority of the population is down south. If you live up north, they call that living in the bush, or in the countryside is how they call it. The culture there is just so interesting. It's a lot different than the States. They're very open, and they're very willing to talk to you and to share with you and to invite you in. They're not very warm about it, but that's just kind of how, once you get to know them, you realize that's just their mannerisms, right? I think as Americans, we're super friendly and smiley, and we always like to show our affection and stuff, and they're not like that. They're a lot more reserved, is probably a better way of saying it. They're very reserved. I just call Grenada like the Rasta Island. So Rastafarianism is this big thing there. Bob Marley, and you know, the red, yellow, and green colors for that kind of culture. That's really, really strong there. That whole, just really laid back, really easygoing. So it's pretty cool. I think my favorite thing about Grenada, of course, was just the people. They just have really good hearts. They're awesome. I was in really poor areas the whole time, and it was just really cool to work with those people who oftentimes just had really good attitudes despite the circumstances they were in. They're very, very religious. No matter what their circumstances are, they always give thanks to God, and they always praise God. And you'll say, well, how do you know God's real? And they'll say, well, I had breath this morning, you know? Just really good attitudes. So that was pretty good. It's also a hard place to serve. And this applies to the whole Caribbean because their lifestyle is just at total odds with the principles of the gospel. Most people smoke weed, which has to do with the Rastafarianism, right? And the dreadlocks, they like to do that. But when they receive that witness of the gospel, it's really cool to see what they're willing to do to change. So it was a really, really awesome experience living there. It's English speaking, but it's not. They have their own dialect of it. And so when I first got to the mission, I couldn't understand what locals were saying. Even if they were like educated at the airport and their job was to speak to foreigners, I could not understand a thing. The accents are so thick. And then especially once we got into the more of the poorer areas that were a lot less educated and more detached from sort of like Americans and tourists and stuff, the language is just, it's English, but it's not, if that makes sense. It's sort of their own form of Ebonics. It's pretty interesting. Get ready, you just gotta listen. I mean, you'll get the hang of it just talking to them and stuff. I never really got down how to speak like that, but I could understand them pretty well. Just to immerse yourself in it, that's really the only way to learn it. Unfortunately, there's no Grenadian slang dictionary, so, you know, just gotta learn it as you go. English is their first language. I know that there are places in the mission, for instance in St. Lucia, where they speak patois, which is a mix of English and their native tongues that came with them from Africa, because most of them are the descendants of slaves who were transported to the West Indies. And so, yeah, kind of interesting.